Hello, welcome to the Society for Evangelical Armenians YouTube channel. I'm Dan Chapa, and I'm excited today because I've got a guest who's also been a longtime friend, Colton Carlson. And Colton, I think you are maybe the second Calvinist we've had on the Society for Evangelical Armenians YouTube channel. So for starters, welcome. And just knowing who you are, I know you'll certainly represent the Calvinist position, the theistic determinist position, very stoutly. In fact, in a very special way. I know you're just a very careful thinker, and I've always been super impressed with your writings, your work, and everything like that. So, for starters, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and it's always a pleasure. So thank you so much, Dan, for having me. It's an honor. Appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise. So I guess I know we've talked on other formats, but for this channel, if you could maybe just give a brief introduction, just a little bit about yourself, your background, and your interest in theology and Calvinism and those sorts of things. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in an Arminian-leaning Baptist church, so General Association of Regular Baptist Churches, so GARB churches in the Midwest. If anyone remembers, I don't think it's around anymore, but pretty prominent in the 90s and 80s. And so GARB churches is what we call them. And of course, they're not like overtly Arminian, but they're kind of Arminian leaning, and it's kind of how I grew up. Went to college, and I just thought Calvinism was the stupidest thing ever. So I don't even know if I told you this, Dan, but I really didn't think Calvinism. I mean, I like the sovereignty part, but I'm like, everyone believes in the sovereignty of God. It's obviously it's a Christian thing. Well, duh, and it's very biblical, predestination and everything. But thought total depravity, as most Arminians, the vast majority of Arminians would hold to. And so I thought, well, yeah, for sure, that's fine. But when you start getting into, um, unconditional election, and irresistible grace is when it starts. And limited atonement is where they really chop it up. So most, in my experience, most Arminians, at least the church I grew up in, strongly believed in total depravity and perseverance of the saints. But those middle ones, man, just got destroyed, in my view. And I didn't really think that they were um, biblically accurate. But I mean, I was just 19, uh, 18, something like that. Started studying as, this story kind of unravels, and I started seeing, I would say, not the exegeticalness of Calvinism. I started seeing the beauty of it, and the philosophical prowess and the systematics behind it. I started to see the connections and the harmony from history all the way into contemporary theology, and I loved it. And I didn't. I thought their systematics for Calvinism were so much more well thought through and philosophically rigorous than the standard Arminian theology that I was used to reading and thinking about at the time. So I just started thinking specifically, though, about irresistible grace, and irresistible grace with all the all the intricacies that go along with irresistible grace, free will, and everything. That's really what caught my attention. And so I've always said, for nearly a decade plus now, that I'm a Calvinist primarily for philosophical reasons, and I still stand by that. I think that Arminianism, or non-Calvinism, can be interpreted in a variety of different ways throughout the scripture, but I also think Calvinism can just as easily be derived in the scripture. And so I don't approach this text, as we'll probably see, very exegetically. And I approach the text, 1 Corinthians 10:13, and a variety of other texts philosophically, because I just think that it's a standstill, it's no man's land when it comes to exegetical concerns. So really early on, I started thinking about Calvinism philosophically like that, and I think that it wins the day, philosophically. And so, like for instance, compatibilism and irresistible grace, the beauty behind it, divine determinism, um, the answers to the problem of evil. I feel like the Calvinist side has robust answers to all of them that are not exactly philosophically um, entertained or seriously entertained, but they ought to be. And I think that it's relatively making a comeback in the theological and philosophical literature now than it has ever been before in the last like 20, 30 years, ever since like the Piper era and everything that kind of, in my mind, bastardized a lot of the philosophical thinking. But I think that the philosophical thinking with regards to Calvinism is coming back, and I think that it should stay. And that's kind of where I fit in. I kind of want to be nested in that little niche. The I the philosophical pieces of Calvinism, and we can take those theological elements, apply them, toy with them philosophically, and then just see where the chips land. And so that's kind of where I've done the bulk of my thinking and my work over the last 4 years, especially with defenders of Molinism like Tim Stratton, as Dan knows, other Arminians like Dan himself, and so David Paulman, and so pretty prevalent online. And I'm happy to be here. Started a YouTube channel, not really active on it anymore, but I have a variety of things published in response to Tim Stratton on academia that's free. So, and I'm currently working on an article that I hope to be sent out by the end of the year on moral responsibility and general really. That would be an academic philosophical article. So
Sure. So thanks. Yeah, there's a lot there. Some of it I'd love to dive in on, especially the problem of evil and that sort of thing, and also your overall framework that you're coming up that you see the philosophical beauty in the system of Calvinism, and that was part of the impetus. So I think that's interesting, but I should, for the sake of this episode, just focus in on 1 Corinthians 10:13 and start from there. So if you, and I know you've written extensively on this subject, so just so everyone knows, we'll be referring to, I guess this is volume 3 of your review of Mere Molinism, but it's available in Academia by Colton, and it's a brief philosophical and dialectical inquiry into Mere Molinism. And then this is volume 3, and it is almost extensive. It's pretty extensive on just 1 Corinthians 10:13, and it involves quite a bit of research and quite a bit of philosophical thinking. So, okay. So with that said, I guess it's probably on me to start out, because I should advance what I think is the basic argument for libertarian freedom based on 1 Corinthians 10:13. Now, then we'll get into your work and what you've said in response to that basic argument and kind of see where it goes. But I think the affirmative burden is me, because I'm the one that thinks that 1 Corinthians 10:13 teaches libertarian free will. So the passage is just obviously from the Apostle Paul. He's writing to the Corinthian church, and they've gone through some idolatry, both inside the church and then also experiencing eating meats, eating that have been sacrificed to idols, and they have some freedom with respect to that, but at the same time, there's some dangers with respect to that. And then so Paul gives some overview and goes back to Old Testament examples of idolatrous apostasy and things like that. But in addition to that, so when we come to 1 Corinthians 10:13, we're told, and I'll use the English Standard Version, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, he'll provide a way of escape that you'll be able to endure it. So you have this God providing a way of escape, and the reason why he's doing that is so that we will be able to endure the temptation. Now, these temptations involve idolatrous apostasy, but they're not exclusive to idolatrous apostasy. The language is broad, no temptation. And so I think the basic argument is that, well, Christians do sin sometimes. And when they sin, they were provided a way of escape by God such that they were able to endure it. They were able to not have sinned. So they were able to sin or they were able to not sin. So they have this twofold ability. And there's two real possibilities that they face when they make these moral choices. And that looks like the core idea of free will. And now the next level down is, well, what is the exact nature of the argument that I'm putting forward? And it's oftentimes, especially on the internet, especially recently, people focus on the issue of moral responsibility and libertarian free will. And although I agree with them, I agree with that argument. I think it is very difficult, if not impossible, to square a determined action with moral responsibility. That is not the basis of this argument. We're going to set that aside. And that won't be the way I'm arguing for libertarian free will based on this text. Rather, the issue is, what is this ability to do otherwise that we have? And what is its nature? And I think the easy answer for compatibilists is to say, well, yes, there are ways in which compatibilism can speak of an ability to do otherwise, an ability to endure these temptations, a way of escape that is compatible with determinism. I think that just straight out should be granted. But the problem is this: the way in which compatibilists define the ability to do otherwise is what's called philosophical stipulation, right? They stipulate definitions of terms, including biblical terms, because the Bible uses the term free will, it uses the term choice, it uses these terms for abilities and ability to do otherwise. And the one thing we can't do in exegesis is just make up a definition. Now, the history of compatibilism has been one of making up a definition and then tweaking it. So, I mean, it started in the Enlightenment, but you have early on, you have guys like Hobbes and Locke and some others, where they came up with, like, basically, well, as long as you're not under compulsion, you have free will. And the general response is, that's not what anyone means by free will. It may mean the freedom of the body, like a person that's not in chains. So the body is free, but the will isn't free if the will can't do otherwise. So they started with one definition, and now the definition starts getting tweaked in other ways, like you can if you want to, or the hypothetical or conditional ability to do otherwise. That's fallen under hard times as well. I could get into why, but not the point. Now there's more iterations of it that have gotten to the points of dispositional compatibilism, like Vivalin and stuff like that. And that's probably the cutting edge, and maybe we'll discuss some of that tonight, is dispositional compatibilism. But the point is that we can't take this approach to exegesis. We can't try to define these biblical terms or biblical expressions based on philosophical stipulation of here's what choice means, or here's what ability means, or here's what the ability to do otherwise means. We can't use that for exegesis. That has to be set aside. What we need to do is determine, well, what was the biblical usage? And to do that, you need to know who Paul's audience was, because Paul was communicating directly to his audience, and what was their understanding. And in essence, it comes down to the Bible is written to the house of Israel, to the church. So common parlance was used. It's a plain book. And that's the issue, is that the types of explanations that are typically presented from the Calvinist side on 1 Corinthians 10:13 they might work philosophically, they might not, but they might, but they're inappropriate to use in exegesis of a text. So that's the argument in a nutshell as to why we feel that this passage teaches libertarian freedom. There's a lot more that could be said, but I don't want to hog the mic. So I guess now I know you've got plenty of responses in here, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing them. I've read them from your work, and it took me quite a while, and I apologize for that because I read it and then you tweaked it, you added some more stuff, then I read some more stuff, but then and it's not easy for me to analyze material this weighty. So I appreciated the level of depth that you went into in your research. So your work on this subject deserves focus and time and attention. So anyways, I'm here to listen. So what do you think?
Well, so I obviously disagree that the verse teaches libertarian freedom. And I kind of break it up in multiple different sections. The first section of the paper really deals with just the very bare bones. Let's just grant that an agent has free will if they could do otherwise, either succumb to temptation or resist the temptation. What does that look like? And then I kind of piece together what that looks like, and then tries to formulate charitably what the libertarian is trying to get after here. And then I start knocking it down just kind of piece by piece. And then I kind of break it up by looking at the next kind of section, I guess, ish. Big section would be to look at what other thinkers have thought about this. So that includes Stratton, because Stratton is it's one of his main arguments, actually. If you really listen to him on podcasts or YouTube or a guest speaker, one of the main arguments that he uses for libertarian free will is not just his free thinking argument, but really theologically, 1 Corinthians 10:13. It is the first one he presents in his book on the theological chapter, and he almost always at least says it if someone asks him theologically, why do you believe libertarian free will from the Bible? He says 1 Corinthians 10:13. He used it in, I believe, he used it in his James White debate. He used it in other debate and discussion formats as well. He used it against me all the time. So I mean, it's just very common. And then I also look at Paul Himes, who has written. I don't look at David Kochi something from the 90s. I don't really, but I do reference him. I don't really look at his in depth, but I do look at Himes because his is very prominent, and that was the most recent from the Journal of Evangelical Theology, I believe, and it was in 2011. And then I go through him and Cohen because they have a back and forth. So I kind of decipher and kind of exegetically go through that mess, and I kind of weigh in on it. I honestly take some things from Himes that I think he got right, and I take some things from Cohen that I think he got right, and then I kind of throw out all the drama and just keep what I think that we should say about the verse and what each one got right, and then I kind of put that in as a framework for okay, where are we at now? And then towards the third-ish piece of the paper, I look at Paul Manada's unpublished paper that was in 2012, I believe, on 1 Corinthians 10:13. Dan is very well aware of that paper, and he cites it before, I think, somewhere. And then basically he argues this idea of will setting, and it is a libertarian idea, and I exegete Manada. I show that I actually tend to agree with Manada, and if he's right, then Himes's view and Stratton's view is in trouble. And so we have to adopt what is called a historical view or tracing view. I then help the libertarian out, and by showing them that, okay, we can take 1 Corinthians 10:13 in this, what's called a historical or tracing view, and then I formulate the verse in terms of that view. But then I say, okay, this is good, it's better than the original, but it still fails. And that's really the last piece of the paper that I spend honestly a huge chunk of time on. It's the constitutive luck piece that I show that even if you historically take a view of 1 Corinthians 10:13 and put a libertarian view that is a tracing view into it, you still have problems with regards to constitutive luck. And that is not something that's easy to get over. Because of all these problems, it is better, in my estimation, to just drop the I'm just giving a quick gloss. Obviously, we'll go to the details, but it's better to just drop the dogma that 1 Corinthians 10:13 teaches libertarian freedom, a metaphysical interpretation, and just take a pastoral interpretation or agnostic interpretation when it comes to metaphysical free will. Like you can say that it teaches free will, but you don't have to say that it teaches this kind of free will. Or you can say that it's a pastoral ministerial sort of encouragement or admonition, instead of that it's teaching specifically that the agent has the ability during temptation to succumb or not succumb to that temptation, uh, to the action, whatever you're being tempted to do. And I think this is plausible. And then I really end with a dispositional view, which Dan already mentioned, dispositional compatibilism. And importantly, I don't show that the verse entails it. I don't show ever that the verse like entails a specific view of compatibilism, because I don't think that it does. I really don't. I don't think it entails a libertarian view. I don't think it entails a compatibilist view. I think that I'm barring skepticism here because I'm just putting it in terms of libertarianism and compatibilism, that free will does exist. So because of that, I just don't think that it entails either one of those two options. And so um, with that said, even if the verse is compatible with the dispositional analysis, and I think it is, that means that it cannot entail libertarian free will. Because if it's incompatible with a view that's not libertarian free will, then the verse cannot be entailed, or the verse cannot entail that view that is incompatible with what it is compatible with. So I think I said that right. So yeah, that's kind of the basic structure of the whole volume. And I start again. I just kind of gave a gloss. I don't know if you have any questions on that gloss, but perhaps.
Well, there's a lot. I think it's probably best to pick one and focus in on. So, I guess maybe can we start with constitutive moral luck? That
Sure.
was a unique position. I don't think I'd heard that articulated before. It's certainly not in this context, but I think if I understand it correctly, you're basically saying, some people are born with certain situations like genetics. So maybe they have either physical strengths or mental strengths or different gifts, different abilities, different situations. And in some sense, that's just the way they're born. That maybe they're born with it, right? Like so. There's a bit of luck to it, and these can influence their morality, their moral choices. So, for example, somebody might have a predisposition to something like it's possible to have like a genetic predisposition to addiction or alcoholism, or whatever the case might be, something specific like that, and it impacts their morality in some cases. Now, if I understood you correctly, you're saying, well, it doesn't eliminate their choices. I mean, they still make choices, but it might make certain choices much, much harder. And because let's say, doing the right thing might be much harder for some person than another, and that's just the way they're born, then it might also impact their moral responsibility. Again, not eliminating it, but diminishing their moral responsibility. For starters, am I on the right track? Am I understanding the argument that you're, or the line of thinking that you're presenting in terms of constitutive moral luck?
Yeah, so basically, constitutive moral luck in general is this idea that something can affect something beyond your control, can affect either the fact or the degree of your praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. And so most people who hold to extant forms of moral luck, most philosophers will say that it doesn't affect the fact of your blameworthiness or praiseworthiness. It just affects like something like the scope, or the degree. And so
Sure.
that means it could affect what you are morally responsible for without negating that you are morally responsible. Or it could affect the degree in which you're morally responsible. So you're not like 100% morally responsible or blameworthy or praiseworthy. You might be like 10% morally responsible. You still are morally responsible and you still are praiseworthy, blameworthy, but it just affects a certain degree. It depends on how much luck you got going on in there. So that's a well-known in the philosophical community, a well-known inverse relationship between luck and control. And so the more luck you have, the less control you have. The more control you have, the less luck you have. Libertarians usually affirm this. Even Christopher Franklin,
Sure.
and Kane, they all pretty much affirm that this is a problem. They don't just brush it aside. They know luck is a problem for libertarianism. They don't think it is a problem, but they know that it is there. And so they usually at least concede that there is this inverse relationship. And I think that's fine. And so I'm with the libertarian that I don't think constitutive luck actually negates free will. So libertarians like Franklin, Kane, Goetz, Tempe, they all think that constitutive moral luck does not negate free will or moral responsibility. Like we can still be morally responsible and still be constitutively lucky at the same time. However, those first morally responsible actions that we do, that is the key part. That's what I'm looking at. The first morally responsible actions. So I mainly take it from Vargas Levy's book in 2011, Vargas from 2007. Um, yeah, from 2007, the Four Views book, his response, his article in there, and then Tempe's book in 2012, the second edition. So I kind of explain all of their views in tandem on in volume 3, page 95 to 96. And so that basically says that they have serious constitutive luck problems at the first moments that you're at the first action you become morally responsible. Take, and I actually present this case in the paper, but take just a normal agent, little Tony, a little agent, 4 years old. He's not really morally responsible. He has no morally responsible history, but then all of a sudden, there has to be a point because we're finite agents where you actually become morally responsible. You can look at that agent and say, no, 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 you are morally responsible, either praiseworthy or blameworthy for doing what you did. And so there has to be. And I think that this is, again, if we're finite agents and we believe that there is free will and moral responsibility, then that has to be the case. Here's the problem, though. They have to take ownership of their agential structure, that agent, at that time when they previously have not taken any ownership of their agential structure at that time beforehand. So they aren't morally responsible at time one. They make an action at time two, and yet now they are morally responsible. They're now part of the moral community, as some philosophers say, at time three. How does that work? And I contend, as many, many other philosophers do, not just incompatibilist philosophers like Goetz and Kane and Tempe, say that this is a very, very big problem. And I think that Tempe's concession in his book, on the last chapter, is probably the most honest. And because I really appreciate Tempe and I love his work, but it's so honest. He says it's a serious lacuna, a very difficult challenge for any libertarian. And it's a gap that he just doesn't. Thad Botham is another one who's a agent causal libertarian, and he's kind of, I wouldn't say disturbed, but very concerned with the lack of actual research or lack of work done on the very first morally responsible action for a libertarian. Like you say that you just all automatically become morally responsible for something, but how? How does that work? So my argument essentially goes right in there. If at the first morally responsible actions you are constitutively lucky, a high dose of constitutive luck. Constitutive luck again is just luck concerning who you are, the character you have, the predispositions that you have, like you said before, Dan, all that stuff. If you own now this constitution that really you didn't even own before at time one, uh, how are you morally responsible? That's pre-conversion. I translate that to post-conversion. So at the first moment that you're tempted, after you become a believer, I want to say you are born again right there, just like you were born, pre-conversion. So your first morally responsible action where you're actually tempted to do something evil, are you constitutively lucky? And I say, yes, you are, because now you have a new constitution. But hey, if you are, then that means, in my view, that means that if you are constitutively lucky at a high dosage, you have far less control than you really did think you had. And that to me undermines the 1 Corinthians 10:13 argument. I don't think, I'm not saying that they can't, like a libertarian can't like bite bullets or can't get around it or anything. I'm not saying I have a knockdown argument. What I'm saying is I just don't think that they understand, oftentimes libertarians understand philosophically the implications of their view if we have all these things put into place. And so I give out 4 options, and those 4 options I start basically saying that there's no relevant difference. We can get into those options, but there's no relevant difference in my mind between compatibility of constitutive moral luck and moral responsibility at that first moment that the agent becomes morally responsible. There's no relevant difference between that compatibilism and the compatibilism between moral responsibility and divine determinism. At that moment, when the agent first becomes responsible, I don't see any relevant difference. And so, really, my argument is give me a relevant difference from the libertarian, and then I'll back down. But I go through a lot of different kinds of relevant differences, what could possibly be a relevant difference. And so I argue that there is none. And if there is none, well, then it doesn't seem like a libertarian has a good argument here. That's kind of the idea in a nutshell.
Would you say that it's begging the question to say that the relevant difference is the ability to do otherwise?
I would say it's begging a question for the libertarian, yes, because it's their argument. So they can't say that. So in one case, oh, it's indeterminism. They could do otherwise, even if they're constitutively morally lucky. But then also in determinism, they couldn't do otherwise, because I would say that there's no relevant difference in terms of their control at that first moment of action. Even if you posit indeterminism, what's the relevant difference in terms of the control? Their agential structures are the exact same.
So, but you don't think that constitutive moral luck eliminates the ability to do otherwise? It just makes it more difficult, right?
Yes, I don't think it eliminates the ability to do otherwise. No.
Okay. Now, I think you're asking some really interesting questions, and I've given some thought to it, but I'm not sure. Maybe we could explore it a little bit. But is it possible that morality doesn't turn off and on like a light switch, but just kind of more like a dimmer switch, right? Like you become more and more responsible over time as your abilities develop. So, presumably, the faculty to reason, is not something. Again, that's something that takes time. It develops. It's one thing to say, a 3-year-old can figure out that I should eat my vegetables rather than throwing them on the floor, but they can't really figure out which is more moral to vote for, like like Trump or Harris or something like that. And so we don't ask them to vote. We don't hold them accountable for that sort of thing because they're not there yet. But why not? Why is it? If the 3-year-old has the ability to reason, they can't figure out, what's the moral vote? What's the moral choice on some very complicated topic? And the answer is they're just not there yet. So maybe moral responsibility is on a continuum, a growing scale over time. Because now, from my standpoint, you talk about the first moment of libertarian freedom. I think it happens inside the womb. I mean, it's the first concept that's formed. It's like, when the baby's foot is bouncing off the mother's womb and it realizes, oh, wait a minute, there's a limit to, I feel when my foot is bouncing off my mom's womb, and that foot isn't the womb. They're different. That's not part of my body. The foot is part of my body. And they form their first concept, right? Like they understand what their body is.
I can grant all of that. I don't think it matters personally,
Yeah.
because when we look at temptation, we look at moral response. Like, you are morally responsible for um, that temptation. And so,
Okay.
if you want to say that, hey, we have libertarian free will just to respond to temptation, and it doesn't matter whether or not we are morally responsible of how we respond to that temptation, well, then I'm not even sure what the argument for 1 Corinthians 10:13 would look like.
Okay, so fair enough. But so I would say that the first moral moment is not going to be relevant, because this 1 Corinthians 10:13 is to Christians, right? And it's talking about regenerated believers that have experienced God's grace. So they're long past their first moral choice. Whether it happened, whenever that happens, it's long since then.
Mhm.
So okay, so from that standpoint, what's the relevance of the first moral choice to 1 Corinthians 10:13?
Because when you become a believer, you're a new believer. So you have a new constitution given to you. You're a new creature. And so then directly after that, after you become a new believer, if you respond to a temptation, you now are responding to that temptation with a qualitatively different set of dispositions. And
Agreed.
because of that, that's when I say, okay, you are constitutively lucky in a different way than you were pre-conversion at your first morally responsible action. True, but you are still constitutively lucky at a high dosage, at a high rate,
Okay.
because you are qualitatively different, a different human being, a different creature. And so that is what I would say is pertinent here. And if you are so high, like up there in the constitutive luck scale, that to me is not relevantly different if you say that that person is still morally responsible for how they respond, even though they're highly constitutively lucky. Then to me, there's no relevant difference between saying that at that moment him being constitutively morally lucky is compatible with him being morally responsible, than saying with a determined agent at the exact same agential structure, at that moment he's divinely determined and still morally responsible. Like, there's no differences between the affections, constitutive luck and divine determinism.
So so I just think that the difference is the ability to do otherwise. And since determinism in some sense implies, well, not in some sense, in a very strong sense, if you're determined, you can't do otherwise than what you're determined to do. So constitutive moral luck, like basically, let me see if I can give an example. Okay, let's say I don't want to. It might be a controversial topic, but let's say somebody has ADHD or whatever, right? Like, so it might be very difficult for a kid with ADHD to pay attention for 45 minutes in a math class. But it's not impossible. Now, it might be harder for that kid than it is for the kid next to him that doesn't have ADHD.
Sure.
But maybe the kid with ADHD is more praiseworthy when he does it. Maybe they're less blameworthy when they don't do it. But they still are praiseworthy and blameworthy because they're able to overcome that constitutive unluck, bad luck that they have. So in other words, I mean, without either side begging the question here, it just seems like the borderline remains what it always was because the battleground is always, what is the relevance of the ability to do otherwise?
Right, and it could be indeterminism, but indeterminism itself doesn't grant libertarian freedom. So that's the first point I actually make in the paper, which we kind of just got past. So even if I were to grant that, which I don't, but even if I were to grant, I don't think that, like, I would essentially say, so what? Like, okay, so you have indeterminism. What does that do for you? And a lot of other philosophers like Tognazzini, Vargas, Tempe, at that first morally responsible action, pre-conversion, post-conversion, doesn't matter. What control does indeterminism give you that is qualitatively different than determinism at that moment, other than the fact that it is just merely indeterminate? That's the question I'm trying to posit here.
Good point. So I mean, the indeterminism itself gives the agent the ability to do otherwise. So let's see. Let me see if I can explain it. So let's take me versus a quark. So like there's a quark that's, over here that's just randomly spinning around or whatever. And so what's the difference between me and this quark, right? So I'm self-aware. I have desires. I am a rational agent. The quark has none of those things. But both of us are indeterminate, not determined, right? So the fact that I'm self-aware and I have a will and agency and desires and reason are what make me different than this quark spinning around, just randomly bouncing around. So I think that's the bulk of the answer. Yeah.
How is that though relevant to your action that you're responding to temptation? As you're responding to temptation for the first time, as you're a new Christian, how is that therefore relevant and different morally than a divinely determined agent doing the exact same, with the exact same psychological structure, the exact same deliberations, literally an intrinsic duplicate to the indeterminate agent? What's the relevant difference between the two agents?
Well, okay, I'd love to answer that, but before I do, I think I should answer in a different way. What's the difference between the quark that's bouncing around and me, right? I think that's the first step, because if I understood your question initially, it's like, well, indeterminism by itself doesn't secure choice and moral responsibility, if I understood you correctly. So
yeah. I don't see it as giving any normative generating work, in words of Vargas. Like there's no normative generating work that indeterminism does to help assign moral responsibility to me at that moment.
So like I said, I think the reason why we don't put morality on the quark that's spinning around over here, but we do on me, is not the indeterminism per se, right? It is only it's the fact that I'm a moral agent. It's the fact that I have reason and I have a will and I'm self-aware. None of those things apply to the quark. So I think those are the factors as to why I'm responsible and the quark is not. Even if, like when we're facing a right-left decision, the quark can go either right or left. It really can, in some sense, and so can I. But why am I responsible and the quark is not? It's because I'm an agent.
So then what's the difference between that and a divinely determined agent with the exact same intrinsic psychological structure as that indeterminate agent, who can deliberate, who can think? If you say that indeterminism, you're right, it doesn't really do much moral work, but I'm still morally responsible because I'm a moral agent and I can still make decisions. Well, the divine determined agent can still do that too, unless you want to beg the question against that, which I don't think you do. So if they are intrinsic duplicates, then what's the difference between those two things?
Okay, so it's the ability to do otherwise, right? Because the determined agent, the determined person, is unable to do otherwise. So when facing a choice, they might think they can do otherwise, but they actually can't, right? Because whatever they're determined to do, that's what they're going to do, and that's the only thing that can happen. Nothing, the opposite can't happen because it's determined not to happen. So I think it just comes down to the ability to do otherwise is the difference between a person with libertarian free will versus a person, or something without libertarian free will.
Okay, so then we're just back to indeterminism, though, right? And if you say ability to do otherwise, which I assume that you say that entails indeterminism, then okay, we're back to indeterminism. But then I'm just going to say, what normative work? But to my mind, you already said that it doesn't do much normative work in that first moral. But I'm still a moral agent, which I can see clearly. Yeah, you're different than the quark spinning around because you are a moral agent. But then again, what moral difference is there between that agent who's supposedly indetermined, though it doesn't
Mhm.
have any normative work generating in there, who can make moral decisions and who can decide and blah, 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 between that agent and let's just meets all the libertarian conditions, that agent and the divinely determined agent at that moment, at that first morally responsible action.
It's pluripotency. It's the yeah yeah. It's the agent is either pluripotent or only able to do one thing.
Potency,
Pluripotency, able to do two things versus able to do one thing.
categorically,
Yeah.
what does the categorical do for you though, in terms of their control? Like you say, you okay, they can do two things, but I mean, what kind, that control means nothing to that agent at that moment because they're so constitutively lucky. They just had an agent, or they just had a constitution that was foreign to them, that was alien to them, and that was given to them by the Holy Spirit. And now they have this new constitution. They respond to temptation. What does that control do for you, other than the fact that indeterminism is positive?
So it might mean, well, now I feel like I'm repeating. So it might mean that one of the paths is more difficult and the other is easier, but it doesn't mean, it doesn't eliminate it down to one path, which is what determinism seems to do, because you can't do otherwise than what you're determined to do. Now, I understand you put the label categorical. Now, I don't why. The only reason I think people would slap the label categorical on it is because there's some alternative version, conditional ability. But I think the problem with the conditional analysis is, I mean, it's fraught with errors, but the biggest error of the conditional ability, so it is that it's not real. It's hypothetical. It's a hypothetical ability. So usually the way it's expressed is you can do otherwise if you want to. So you could eat the chocolate if you want to, right? But you can't choose the chocolate because you don't want to. In fact, your desire for vanilla is so strong that it's determining you to eat vanilla such that you can't do otherwise, including choose the chocolate. So if your desire were different, which is not, then you would. So I think that's the issue. So for me, I mean, there's context in which it's helpful to slap the label, that the ability is categorical versus conditional. But to me, that the hypothetical analysis is so weak, it really doesn't. I don't feel like I should have to put a label on it. Like that libertarian, the ability to do otherwise is categorical, because the conditional analysis is just so fraught with errors. Like, let's just ignore it. I mean, it's kind of like do I have to label myself, I'm an XY person just because there's somebody out there that can't figure out what a woman is?
Mhm. I never said anything about the conditional. And although I still think a conditional in some way, shape, or form is relevant in the sense of being necessary, all the standard errors that the conditional ability tends to have are because it's sufficient, not necessary. So it doesn't really bother me too much. Plus, I could just posit a dispositional ability of being necessary and it solves all the issues. But I don't even want to do that, even though I do argue a little bit for the dispositional ability, but not for it being entailed by the verse. What I'm just mainly saying is that between the two compatibilisms, especially since compatibilism itself doesn't entail indeterminism, I don't see any relevant difference between an agent who is indetermined, but yet heavily could be essentially like heavily manipulated or whatever the junk, but still indetermined, and then an agent who is divinely determined at the same exact point. Uh, so if I don't know how far you read, but I do give three cases, and it's like a pair boom style argument. So I give a
Yeah, I
case
like
of
that.
normal Tony,
Yeah.
obliterable Tony, and then zygote Tony. So normal Tony is your normal libertarian agent. Dan's going to agree that normal Tony is morally responsible. So, okay,
Check.
fine. And then obliterable Tony takes it from Taylor Sear, basically gives an indeterministic manipulation case. And this indeterministic manipulation case is very involved. I won't go too much in detail with it, but it's essentially, it is pretty clear that he is manipulated, he's tampered with in some way, shape, or form. And I think I would even grant that, and I think most libertarians should or would grant that he is definitely tampered with overtly. However, I think he still has all the libertarian conditions in that case. It's just the case that if I call him obliterable Tony because if God doesn't have him, if that Tony in that world doesn't do and respond to temptation after being converted in the way that God wants him to convert, or the way that God wants him to respond, he'll obliterate him, like literally just annihilate him and destroy him.
Yeah.
This can go on forever and ever and ever. And then finally, because he's indetermined, Tony does what he wants him to do. And he does obliterate him in this world. And so he survives. But the intuition is that he's still kind of manipulated in some way, shape, or form. I take those two cases, normal and obliterable Tony. And then I go to the last case, which is a play on Mealy's zygote argument. Exact same psychological structure, exact same dispositional environments, all of that stuff. The only difference is, okay, now God's going to determine him to do what he does.
Yeah.
My argument is that there's no relevant difference between the three cases in terms of the control of the agent, because obviously we're going to say indeterminism, and that's fine. But in terms of the control, that's the key part. What control does he have? And if you say indeterminism, then you have to say that control does really make a difference in how we ascertain an agent's moral responsibility. But I don't see how it does if it's his first morally responsible action. That's the argument.
So, question to you about case 2, the obliteratable Tony. Does Tony's libertarian free will at least contribute to the outcome of whether he does X or ends up obliterated?
It does contribute to the outcome of whether or not he does respond or not respond. I say stealing money, I think, in the case. So it does.
Yes,
it is relevant to the outcome of whether or not he steals money. So he uses his libertarian free will to avoid the temptation to steal money.
Right. And if he does, if he's not going to use it that way, then he gets obliterated. So
yeah.
he, although obviously it's God doing the obliterating, his agency is part of why he either steals or gets obliterated.
Yes, he can choose otherwise.
Yeah. So I guess, I mean, isn't that the difference between case 2 and 3? You know, isn't that?
I mean, yeah. I mean, obviously, I know that, and I spend a whole section detailing, I think, 5 different objections that I think could come about. One of which is the one that you harped on, was the indeterminism. But yeah, I think obviously the most controversial is between case 2 to 3. I think that most libertarians will affirm, yes, Tony is morally responsible and praiseworthy for deciding not to steal the money in case 1. So normal Tony. And then same thing with obliterable Tony. He has libertarian free will. Let's stipulate all that. It's fine. He's indetermined. But then we get to the defined determined case. Like, okay, so what's the difference? And so I think the issue, what I want to try to, again, pinpoint is there's no relevant difference between the agent's control with the compatibilisms, not necessarily just between the agents in general. Obviously, there's tons of differences, I think, indeterminism being the greatest, between the 2 agents. I think, though, that there's no relevant difference in my mind between saying that you are constitutively lucky beyond things, by factors beyond your control, yet still morally responsible. And that affects your moral responsibility. And there's no real difference between that and being divine determined, where your moral responsibility is still affected by factors beyond your control. The only difference is that you couldn't do otherwise, but because it's non-derivative, basic moral responsible actions, the very first one, I don't see why this would matter. I don't see how will setting would matter. I don't see how any tracing view would matter. It's the very first action that the very first temptation you respond to as you become a Christian.
Okay, so let me give you three. Let me give you three cases. So let's say you have three students in a math class, and they're supposed to pay attention during the math class, and one of them has ADHD, and so it's a little bit difficult for them to pay attention. Another one has autism, and it's very, very difficult for them to pay attention. And then the third one, just after they sat down at their chair, God removed their free will, just took it out and excised their free will. They're gone. So they just can't. Now they could if they wanted to, but they have no free will. So they have no ability to choose. So they can't choose to pay attention. Okay. So of those three, which would you expect to pay attention to you during math class? What's your intuition in terms of who's able to actually pay attention to your math class and who's responsible to pay attention in the math class?
I don't quite understand the question. So you have three students, all with varying difficulties of paying attention.
Right. So one has I don't want to belittle anything, but ADHD is a lesser mental health issue than autism. I think hopefully we would agree on that. So one is like, it's a little bit difficult to pay attention. Another one, it's really tough. Like if somebody has autism, it might be really, really, really tough to sit through a math lesson. And then the third one just has no free will. God removed their will. The moment they sat down on the chair, everything else about them left there, but he just took out the free will, so they can't choose to pay attention. So for starters, do you let any of them off the hook for paying attention?
No, but I'm a compatibilist, so I would still hold the one who is determined.
Okay.
Do I know that they're determined?
Well, yeah. Let's say God tells you that. Yeah, I just took out their free will. They have no free will. They cannot choose.
No libertarian free will, right?
No, just whatever you make a free will, it's gone. Yeah.
Well, okay. Whatever I make a free will, if that was the case, Dan, then if they were completely and utterly just no compatibilist, no libertarian free will whatsoever, then I'm going to say that no, he's not morally responsible. That last one.
Right.
But that's because you say I can take out his compatibilist free will. So.
Right. Now let's take the conditional analysis of free will. Even if somebody has no free will at all, it's still the case that if they wanted to, they would pay attention, right?
Yeah, but I deny that the conditional analysis is sufficient for free will, so he still wouldn't be morally responsible.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I got you. So, okay. So I guess that's tailored to the conditional analysis, but, so got it. So I think the point is you have a different intuition about the person that can't choose to pay attention.
Okay, so I see kind of where you're going with it, and if you're trying to make a parallel case or something to my three cases, on the gloss, I don't think it works because my cases have to deal with non-derivative responsibility, whereas your cases presumably don't say anything about that. Is it non-derivative? Is it derivative? I have no idea.
So, okay, maybe the issue is this. Maybe it's you've set aside the conditional analysis, and that's why. So, all right, help me out here. Then, you've played defense very well, right? Like, okay, so like there's a joke in soccer. I played soccer a lot when I was a kid, right? So there's a joke in soccer, like how does a defender score, right? Like they kick the ball to the other team and then they run 10 yards down, tackle them and take it away. And then they find the next person to kick it 10 yards down, run, tackle them, take the ball away. And that's how they go down the field, right? So in any case, you played defense very, very well. Play offense a little bit. What is going on? What is do you hold to an ability to otherwise? And if so, what does it mean? What's it about?
I hold only, so my view is probably closely aligned to Nelkin's view, which is a hybrid between dispositional analysis and the actual sequence. So it's a hybrid between leeway and source. So it's kind of hard to kind of peep because her view is very intricate, but it's very similar to Fisher and Reviews' guidance control. So I do think that the locus of agency and moral responsibility, what's sufficient for that, is source-ed. But you won't be able to know whether or not someone is the source unless they have the alternative, some sort of access to alternative ability to do otherwise. But that lesser form, that leeway, is not sufficient for moral responsibility. It's just the source that's sufficient for moral responsibility. The leeway is just necessary for it. Necessary so that the agent can know that they are the source. If you take the leeway away, you take the source it away, and so therefore they're not morally responsible. So I claim that even in determinism, you have a wide ability and a narrow ability. That's dispositional compatibilism. Okay, that's necessary, not sufficient for free will, but necessary for free will, for us to be morally responsible. That is completely compatible with Nelkin's, well, I claim it's even more compatible with, Fisher and Reviews' guidance control. So we can do that if you want, but Nelkin's view is called the rational abilities view, and it just basically is you are morally responsible and you are free if you do the right things for the right reasons. If you respond, it's a reasons responsive view, but if you do the right things for the right reasons, you are free. That's my basic view.
So you say that the leeway condition is a necessary. It's not sufficient, but it's necessary. But then you express the leeway conditions based on narrow and wide abilities having both the narrow ability and the wide ability.
Yeah, if you just have a narrow ability, you're not free. And if you have a wide ability, that entails you have a narrow ability, and so you are free. Well,
okay.
You could be free because it's a necessary condition, not sufficient. So you could theoretically be free if you have a wide ability.
So I think the question then is, is determinism compatible with having the combination of the narrow and wide ability simultaneously?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. I don't see how at all it could be argued otherwise unless you presume incompatibilism or equivocate on some sort of opportunity condition, which is what I think Franklin does.
Well, the wide ability is definitely about opportunity, right?
So yeah, the wide ability says that if you have the opportunity plus the narrow ability, that's the wide ability.
Right. Okay. So let's take okay. So how is it can you have the opportunity to do something that's impossible?
It's not impossible though. It's just not in that world. Impossible is nomoologically or metaphysically impossible. We're not saying that. So if you want to say impossible in the actual world, I mean, I guess, and I would say yes, that's what the wide ability is. But it's not metaphysically impossible. It's metaphysically impossible for me to not be able to fly in all worlds if I'm a human. So I don't have the wide ability to do that. But I do have the opportunity to talk to you right now because I have the skills necessary to talk to you right now, even if I'm divinely determined. And I'm talking to you, the computer's in front of me, I have that opportunity. Nothing in determinism prevents that opportunity from obtaining. So if I have the opportunity plus the skills, the know-how to talk and blah, 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 I can talk to you. I can be morally responsible for talking to you right now.
So, okay, let's talk that through. So you can have the opportunity to do something metaphysically impossible, if I understood you correctly, but it might be possible in some other senses. So let me see. When I say, okay, let me ask it this way. If you analyze all the prerequisites for, let's use choosing chocolate. If you analyze all the prerequisites, whether it's your agency and the circumstances, everything about it, and let's say you are given all the information, God reveals all the information, can you conclude certainly, necessarily, that you will not choose chocolate?
I don't quite understand the question.
If you're given all the information leading up to the event, everything,
Okay.
and you understand not just the information, but all the relations between how all those factors weigh in on you as a person or whatever, can you basically know with certainty the outcome? In other words, let me put it so. Normally we can tell. If you burn a piece of paper, like if you introduce fire to paper, it's going to burn, and there's not any real doubt about that, right? So the question is, if you have all the factors going into the choice or into the volition, all of them, can you determine with certainty what the outcome will be?
Why is that relevant?
Because I'm trying to get to the sense of which because I'm still asking you the question: is it possible to have an opportunity for? Can you have an opportunity for something that's impossible? That's my question. But I want to get at the sense of impossible I'm trying to ask it in, because you're using a sense of, well, metaphysically impossible. That might be cool, but I guess what I'm saying is I want to get at a different sense of impossible, which is epistemically impossible given all the factors. If you had all the factors, could you figure it out?
I don't know, but I don't know why it would be relevant to at least the wide ability or narrow ability.
Because the reason why is most of the time when we say something is either possible or impossible, we're saying, well, as far as I know, nothing rules it out. Like, okay, so like a deck of cards, it's possible that the next card will be 2, right?
Yeah.
Well, why? Because you haven't seen all the 2s. But if you've seen all 4 2s, if you have all 4 2s in your hands, it's not possible that the next card is 2, right? So no, that's what I'm saying. So that's what I'm trying to get to is,
there are certain dispositions that I have, and I can only operate within those dispositions. That's why the wide ability entails the narrow ability. The narrow ability is necessary for the wide. Even if I have an opportunity to do whatever I want to do, it doesn't mean that I can actually do it. And it doesn't mean that I can be more responsible for it, because I might not have the certain skills, psychological or physical know-how, what it takes to do all that stuff. I have a guitar in this room right now. I know how to play guitar. I've been playing for 10 plus years. I can play the guitar easily in the vicinity because I have a guitar in my room. So technically, yes, it's not impossible for me right now, I would say, even if determinism is true, for me to play guitar right now. That is an open possibility in my mind, even if determinism is true, because I have the opportunity, which determinism doesn't rule out. I have this spatial awareness. I could be determined to do that, but yeah, I still have it. I have these 4 walls. They could be determined as well, and I still have it. So I still have this opportunity. Nothing's metaphysically impeding me to exercise this ability for me to pick up the guitar and be able to use the skill that I've acquired over a decade plus to play the guitar. So in that sense, I am free, or I could be free, to play the guitar.
would you say the same, even if God revealed to you that I've determined you not to play the guitar? You'd still say, yeah, I'm able to play it?
If God revealed to me that he determined me to not play the guitar,
Yeah.
Yes, because I can't categorically do it. So, okay, that's fine. But I still, even if he determined me, and even if I believe that I'm determined, let's just say I do believe I'm determined right now to not play the guitar, then yeah, I could still play the guitar even if I'm determined to play the guitar. That's what the wide ability says. So that's the differences between the leeway of the wide, the dispositional, and the categorical. And the intuition runs only when the categorical is placed in there. So the intuition at first glance is, well, no, of course not. Categorically, totally true, but I don't care about the categorical. What I care about is whether or not it's dispositional. Dispositionally, I have the intrinsic disposition to play the guitar. Nothing in determinism rules that out. And in that sense, I can actually play the guitar.
Yeah, so but to me that's just like a sense of like the skill. You retain the skill. Now,
Sure,
you could,
that's the narrow ability, and that's totally fine. But then if I had
yeah.
the opportunity plus that narrow ability, I can still, in a real sense, say I can play the guitar right now.
So,
Even if I'm
but
determined not to.
even the narrow ability, though, in that sense, has to be conditional, not categorical.
For the narrow ability, conditional.
Yes, because if you have the skill to play the guitar, but okay, so if God has told you, He's determined you not to play the guitar, but you have the condition, the skill, that means that if He had determined you to play the guitar, then you would play the guitar. But I don't think it can't mean more than that. If you're willing to say your skills with the guitar, okay, are your skills able to overcome God's decree and just falsify Him telling you that you're determined? If not, then like, if
Are we free to break the laws, as David Lewis would say? In some
yeah,
sense, yes. But then it would just be it's no different than the simple foreknowledge theist saying, oh, if I were to do this differently, God would have foreknown that. That's just a dependent solution. It's no difference than that. If I were to choose to do this, God would have determined otherwise. But libertarians claim the exact same thing with regards to foreknowledge all the time. So I don't see anything wrong with it.
so there's an interesting parallel. I think actually we've discussed that point, but I still think the point that I'm trying to make, though, is that the narrow ability, I think you are analyzing the narrow ability not in an absolute sense, not in a categorical sense.
Okay.
Yeah. So right. So I think then I think you are subject to all the criticisms of that go against the conditional ability, all the problems that it bears.
Only if it's sufficient. I never claimed once that I think that the narrow ability is sufficient for free will. And I never claimed once that the wide ability is sufficient for free will.
Right, but you did say it's necessary. It's a necessary component.
And none of the like from Lair or Kizom, I think that's how you pronounce his name, or Kane, it's all against the sufficiency of it. And so I don't really see why it would matter. If I just say that's necessary, then the libertarian can say that's necessary too. I'm not saying that if I have it, therefore I'm free. I think
I agree.
Forced to do that.
I agree with your distinction between the sufficient and necessity. But if you're saying it's necessary, you have to have this leeway condition, and you explain the leeway condition on the conditional ability. Then you have to have the conditional ability to be morally responsible.
That's what necessary means.
Right. And if there's a serious problem with the conditional ability, then that is a problem with your overall account of moral responsibility. Even if it's only a piece of it, it's a piece that's necessary. You can't just lop it off. You can't just say, I don't care about the conditional ability. No, it's necessary on your system.
I never claimed that it was not. I never claimed that the conditional ability is irrelevant. to my system of free will. I said it's irrelevant to how I respond to 1 Corinthians 10:13. That's what I said. And so I still think it's irrelevant to how I respond to 1 Corinthians 10:13. But it is relevant in some sense to in my own free will. I do think that the dispositional ability does entail some sort of conditional. And I think that Bignon did a good job at showing that almost all aspects of blamelessness, comes from some sort of conditional ability. And so that I still agree. I've never denied that. However, I
So
don't think that just because there's a problem with the conditional, when it comes to the sufficiency of it, therefore transfers all the way to the conditional, and we should just get rid of it. And so it just proves the whole system wrong. That doesn't make
so
any sense.
I just think you've put a couple steps in between 1 Corinthians 10:13 and the conditional analysis, but I still think it's necessary in your system. So correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going to say, okay, so we do have an ability to do otherwise. We have an ability to succumb to temptation. We have an ability to avoid temptation.
No, I
Now,
deny all of that. I don't take any metaphysical interpretation to 1 Corinthians 10:13 whatsoever. I just say that's compatible with it. That's it. But I also think it's compatible with the libertarian view. I
wh-
think it's compatible with the skeptical view. I think it's compatible with any view, honestly.
so wait,
I deny that it entails any sort of metaphysical free will view.
does 1 Corinthians 10:13 teach that we're always that we're able to escape temptations?
No, it doesn't.
It says, "No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, he will also provide a way of escape so you'll be able to endure it." So, how are you saying that this isn't teaching that Christians are able to escape temptations?
Because I think in the proper context, it's a pastoral, ministerial encouragement that God is faithful. The verse is not about believers, it's about God. And it's about how faithful he is, even in the midst of hard temptation for a believer. And so I think Cohen, this is one, so Cohen says something similar and about the virtues of a human being. And so and I said in the paper that I essentially agree with Cohen. I think that this is a good response. Himes had some good responses too, and I take a little bit of his response, but generally I think that it is about God and it's about his faithfulness and has nothing at all to do with how we are available or have this ability to respond to any sort of temptation.
So, for starters, just checking the comments, and I demand respect for Colton, and I do not appreciate the last comment. I get the passion, but at the same time, and I totally disagree with Colton. But I think maybe the best thing to do is just give you a different opportunity. So let me see if I can echo back what I'm hearing. I think in one part I just have to push back, but I think what I am hearing from you though, that just to be as fair as possible, you're saying that the verse isn't about metaphysical commitments. And if that's
Yeah.
your point, maybe we could agree or disagree, but I think that's much more reasonable. But now, if you're saying, on the other hand, Colton, if you're saying this verse has nothing to do with our abilities and ability to do otherwise,
Uh-huh.
I have to push back, because it's not just about God's faithfulness. Of course, it's about God's faithfulness, but it says that God is faithful. How? He will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. So it is directly addressing our ability.
Sure. And if you want to say that, then I have an argument in the paper that shows that you have to bite a heavy dose of constitutive luck just to argue for it, which is fine. And
Yeah.
also, if all of that stuff fails, you would still have to show that the dispositional ability itself is incompatible with the verse. Because I think it is compatible with the verse. It doesn't entail it, but I think it is compatible. But I also think it's compatible with libertarian free will. But you want to say that's entailing the verse, like the verse literally entails libertarian free will. So that means you would have to show not just that it entails libertarian free will, but in virtue of it entailing free will, that the dispositional analysis cannot possibly be compatible with the verse. But
Yeah.
I disagree because it's so vague that we don't see any. I think it defies exegesis heavily in the verse. If we want to impose some sort of metaphysical requirement, such as the principle of alternative possibilities in the categorical sense, for it to be that stringent of an interpretation, you would have to have a very, very strong interpretation of the verse just to be able to get there. And I don't see that it's possible. So I think that, I mean, I have the argument in the paper, but if the dispositional analysis is compatible with the verse, that entails that, yeah, 1 Corinthians 10:13 cannot entail at all libertarian free will. And so what I'm saying is that I think we should just drop the dogmatic interpretation and then just say, okay, it might entail some sort of ability, maybe, although I don't think it does, but I can grant maybe it does. Or it entails that we're free. Okay, that's fine. But the kind and specific free will that we have, the specific way in which we are morally responsible and how we respond to temptation, all of that metaphysical fluffiness should not be imposed on the verse. That's what I'm trying to convey.
Okay. I mean, there's a sense in which I can respect where you're coming from on that. I think, you know, obviously I disagree, and that's part of the fun, right? So I think on the one hand, I question, or not just question, I don't know that you can interpret the verse without the conditional ability. I don't think a theistic determinist could. I think the conditional ability is necessary to just get by the verse.
Again, just because I say that something is compatible with it doesn't require me to say that that something is also entailed by it. Like just because I say that the dispositional analysis is compatible with the verse doesn't mean that I'm saying it entails, like the verse entails the dispositional analysis. That doesn't follow. I'm just saying that's compatible with it. And if it is compatible with a compatibilist ability, then metaphysically, logically, it is incompatible with an incompatibilist ability. So that means it cannot entail libertarian free will if the dispositional ability is compatible with it.
So, okay, right. So I hear you. So, and again, I'm playing defense now. I'm that soccer player that's kicking the ball down. So on offense, now here's where you're going to totally disagree with me. My offensive approach would be Paul has to use common parlance because he's speaking to a whole church. Okay. And he can't use the philosophical nuances that are involved, like in Villain wasn't alive then or whatever, but not just that. Those ideas weren't prevalent enough at the time, so he would have to express himself in a different way if he was trying to avoid teaching libertarian freedom. But by using these common sense terms, he is teaching libertarian freedom, because just interpreting these terms in their common way is going to result in people believing libertarian freedom.
Okay. Even if I granted all that, how does indeterminism entail libertarian freedom? You have to have indeterminism, free will, and incompatibilism just to get to libertarian freedom. All you have is indeterminism itself. I can even grant that you have indeterminism and free will, but then just because you have that doesn't itself give you incompatibilism. You need the categorical to be in part of free will and indeterminism just to get you incompatibilism. But then how do you get the categorical out of that verse?
Okay, so your first question is, how is this more than just indeterminism? And the answer there is because it's talking about an agent and their properties. So again, the difference between me and the spinning particle is that I'm a moral agent, that I'm rational, that I have a will, that I have desires, and those sorts of things. So in this context, it's not talking about just indeterminism per se. It's not talking about a spin particle. It's talking about a moral agent. I would assume we would agree there.
Yes.
Okay.
But we can still be moral agents and not be free, because that is a view. It's just skepticism. So just because you have moral agents doesn't mean that you automatically get free will.
Oh, right. So my claim was a little more modest. It's that it's not the passage doesn't stop short at indeterminism per se. It stops. It gets beyond pure indeterminism to moral agency. So right. So I'm not that plank is not why I'm saying. Let's see. You got me thinking. Okay. So the passage. You can't apply a passage like this to a particle that's spinning randomly, right? So it applies only to moral agents. Now, you're right, I need a separate argument. Well, now why is it a libertarian free agent versus a compatibilist free agent? That's true. But I think I've been trying to do that, which is, it's the common parlance that of his day, language like this would have just been understood to imply libertarian free will. But at the same time, and then that's the positive side. The negative side is there's no way. The negative side is the problems involved in the conditional analysis. And it's, in essence, it's taking the verse and making it say, hypothetically, you have the ability to avoid temptation, but you actually don't. That's problematic.
Again, I deny that it could teach conditional. So I agree with you. That right there is irrelevant. I don't think it teaches any sort of dispositional ability or conditional ability. I don't think it can. But I also think it just can't teach libertarian free will. You say that it's common parlance, but a dispositional ability could just be, again, common parlance. And that's what I described in the last piece of the paper. The notion of opportunity, unless you superimpose something to be categorically accessible, and that is the thing that we mean by opportunity, well, then you're just imposing incompatibilism on the verse. And it's worse for you because you want to say that it entails that. I'm just saying that's compatible with it. So I'm saying that I think the common parlance could be understood dispositionally just as well. And that was literally the whole premise of Avellan's 2013 book, is that we're trying to get back to a common idea of what leeway should look like, what free will should look like. And to her, it's wide and narrow ability. And I show in the paper, in volume 3, that both of them are not ruled out by the verse, by any sort of anything in that verse. No phrase or anything rules out having a wide and narrow ability. And if that's the case, then that means it's compatible with it. If it's compatible with it, then libertarian free will cannot be entailed by the verse.
So, okay. Well, at this point, we'd be repeating. Just to recap, I mean, my position on the narrow and wide ability is the narrow ability is conditional. It is a conditional ability. It's not a categorical ability. And then the opportunity, the wide ability, it seems absurd to say you have the opportunity to do something that's impossible. And the sense in which is not just the sense of metaphysically impossible, but also epistemically impossible.
I could grant determinism, and I can grant indeterminism in the entire verse. I can say determinism is false, and I could still put dispositional compatibilism as being compatible in the verse.
May you explain that again?
Dispositional compatibilism doesn't entail determinism. So if you're saying that you think it's impossible for you to have a wide ability, have an opportunity for something, if you're determined, whatever, and determined in your mind means impossible, fine. Determinism is false. Indeterminism is true. Dispositional compatibilism can still be true. And I can still put that on the verse. I can still be an indeterminist compatibilist and yet still say the verse is compatible with that.
But that's assuming determinism is compatible with the narrow and wide ability, I think.
I could say that so indeterminate, I can still be an indeterminist compatibilist. That doesn't, like, that's a still metaphysically open space. The only way when I'm an indeterminist, if I'm an indeterminist and believe free will, I would have to believe in the categorical free will for you to get where you're going with it, for determinism to be false necessarily by free will.
This is the point in the chess match. So you're like thinking 14 moves ahead. I mean, and I'm like about to flip the board. So I got you. Yeah, I'm certainly impressed with your ability to think this abstractly. But okay, so I guess we're probably about an hour and a half in, and for me, it's getting a bit late. So for starters, I just wanted to say thank you for coming, for joining, and for putting up with me, putting you on the hot seat and stuff like that. I am impressed with your work and this massive kind of tome on First Corinthians. I think it deserves attention, and it's frankly it deserves a response. So I appreciate you're putting all that effort into it. Do you have any closing thoughts? Any last? Just let me give you the final word here before we wrap up.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, thanks. It's an honor. I love talking about, just like you do, philosophy and theology and the theological implications of our views. So, Dan, I always appreciate talking to you. You know that. So thank you. I honestly, I would love for others to respond to it, if even in writing or video, it doesn't matter. I think it's a good argument all the way through. Even if, like you said, I do think it deserves a response. I was on the Free Thinker podcast since, he closed shop and everything, but it stumped him, and he was like, I don't know how to respond to it. And so I'm still open ears for people to go in and try to, I guess, put in some holes. So that's number one. And number two is, it was supposed to be 40 pages. So, to be honest, it was supposed to be a small little, when I started writing, because I had all these other plans for volume 3, it wasn't supposed to be just on 1 Corinthians 10:13. And then as I started, uncovering stuff and researching it, I fell in love with it. Like, I just loved it so much, and I found all these connections, and I just started looking into it, and the luck, and then the dispositional compatibilism, and it's so fascinating. Before I knew it, I was at like 100, 120 pages. I'm like, yeah, I can't do anything more. I have to just leave it at this. So there was going to be more in response to Stratton, but I have to just leave it at that. So I hope those of you who are listening or whatever, feel free, download it for free to respond, to read it, think about it, and let me know.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you again. And thank you for all the comments on that. I know we didn't get to okay. So I see CJ, I see John, Discerner, the other Caleb. So I appreciate all the comments and everything. And I'm glad we cleared some stuff up in the comments. So I appreciate that. And thanks again, Colton, and everybody. God be with you.